Hello and welcome. It's Win Thurlow, Executive Director of Life Sciences New York. Welcome to our Spotlight series, a regular series of conversations with innovators, leaders, and folks that are moving New York State's life sciences industry forward. I'm pleased to be joined today by Ben Verschueren, who is the Executive Director of the New York Department of Science, Technology, and Innovation, more commonly known as NYSTAR. Ben, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Win. Great to be here.
So, Ben, I suspect much of our audience is certainly aware of NYSTAR and the work that you do, but you're relatively new to this role, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your background, what brings you to NYSTAR, and perhaps we'll be able to talk about your vision for where the division is moving forward. How's that?
That sounds great. Yeah, so I'll start with a little about me. Actually grew up in New Hampshire, went to school in Rhode Island, and now have been in New York for 25 years. So officially the longest place I've lived anywhere, but always in the wonderful Northeastern United States throughout. My background actually right out of undergrad. So I studied computer science, went to work for General Electric. They hired me at their research center. I was in a program where they paid for me to get my master's degree right down the road here at Rensselaer. So I got my master's degree in computer science and was really a researcher for GE for about 8 years in the kind of large scale architectures, AI space across a number of different applications. So really got an appetite early on for kind of having a technical core that I could apply in a number of different areas, from healthcare to energy to, I worked a lot with NBC Universal when they had a media arm. So that kind of diversity of, hey, I can, even with a toolbox of hammers, I could apply that on a bunch of different verticals. So I really enjoyed doing that. Then actually went to NBC Universal for a couple of years directly, worked out of 30 Rock, and ran their technology research portfolio, which was a really interesting time. Came back then to the research center, ran a program for entry-level engineers, and actually got more into the kind of technical mentoring education side, and helped develop programs for GE that train technologists across the career path. So everything from entry level all the way through our chief scientists. We would have these kind of topic of the day. So when additive manufacturing was new, and GE was trying to understand how do we, what does GE do with this? We took a bunch of chief engineers to go see the best of the best in the world and inside GE to understand what's it capable of. How do we think about it from GE? How do we do that? And really led to ultimately GE kind of purchased and now has a tier 2 business where they make metal additive machines. So really interesting kind of strategically of how you process new technologies into an ecosystem. So did that for a while, and then actually my last role at GE is I started kind of an internal incubator to the research center called the Forge Lab, where we would really fund kind of our internal entrepreneurs that had ideas of, again, these emerging technologies, whether it be quantum computing or how do I take a massive amount of sensors and build a smart safety network that uses a bunch of different data and analytics to keep workers safe, to even things like how do I do autonomous guidance of an ultrasound probe so a total novice could come and actually do a medically significant scan on a patient, those kinds of things. So really taking those ideas, but actually helping those, again, internal entrepreneurs break down all those barriers between a good and interesting technical idea and how do you actually make it viable for either internally to GE as an industrial idea or as a spin out as how would you actually take this. And so the thing I really picked up from that, again, the breadth of technologies was amazing. Many things that pushed me outside of my core, and it just kind of, I'm very technology curious and learned that, all technology is exciting, even if it's not, in my base. But also, there's so many ways that a great idea can die on that pathway between, hey, I've got an idea and it's actually something in the world that makes a dent in the world. And the best thing you can do to harvest that ecosystem is just knock down those barriers or soften them as much as possible and just keep that person focus, keep moving, keep driving, keep your passion, don't get frustrated, and then amazing things can happen. So then actually after 23 years with GE, left and went to a company called Fluence, who does grid scale energy storage. So I actually ran their global labs, really learned a lot on the energy side of how as we're doing this, we're in this massive transition to renewables and, smart grids and that kind of stuff. It's not going to happen without energy storage. So really learned a lot in that ecosystem of what does it take? We were putting massive installations of lithium cells out that would balance the grid and offset renewables. Did that for a couple of years, and then actually the NYSTAR position came across my inbox, and it was an offer I couldn't refuse to look at and say, here's there are three reasons why I was interested. So one, back to that breadth that GE had across all these verticals. You look at everything that's happening in New York State. I thought GE was broad. I mean, it's just even, we do everything. So life sciences we're talking about today, we're, again, quantum, we're announced that we have a fashion innovation center. So fashion technology and sustainable engineering, just everything across our NYSTAR network in the state is just, you can imagine anything that's out there that's happening in the world is happening in NYSTAR. So that was one. The second was I've always been interested in the public sector. I come from a family where, my brother, my father, my mother have always worked for public institutions. And it's always been kind of where do I make that transition from industry to that angle? And then the third is, I'd been in a fully remote position and I missed, coming into the office some days a week, the interaction with people. This is great virtual, but I'd love to be sitting with you over a cup of coffee and really learn personally that there's things that I do really well. There's things that are great from home and I still want to have that time. There's things that are great in the office where you just need this, I love a whiteboard. I want to sit around with smart people at a whiteboard and just map stuff out, and you get so many things done that way. So being able to return to a hybrid type environment's really been beneficial. So those kind of three factors came in, and it really hasn't disappointed. I mean, in my first week, I've told the story many times. Of in a single conversation spanned everything from fashion technology to quantum to AI to everything under the sun. So it's been been an exciting adventure.
So Ben, I'm curious. As I was listening to you talk, particularly about your experience with an internal incubator, it strikes me that so much of what NYSTAR does really is in the incubation space in one way or another, and perhaps you tell me. It strikes me that may really be kind of the through line about the work that NYSTAR is doing. And I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about kind of your vision of what incubation means and what role does New York State play in that space?
Absolutely. And maybe I'll start with just kind of the way I've parsed. Because again, we just did a kind of an inventory across NYSER. We have 86 assets across the state. So it's a massive investment statewide to build. And it's really this innovation ecosystem, this foundational layer that, exactly to your point, I think is built around how do we make it the best state in the country, the best place in the world to come be an entrepreneur, to be an innovator, to be a small business. And so when I think about that and really how do we achieve that higher level goal, I kind of categorize NYSTAR into three buckets. So one is exactly what you said. We have our incubators, our hotspots, our accelerators. Those are really kind of the front line to reach out to those companies, give them space to work, tie them into all the, into networks of, people that are going through a similar experience, understanding how do you tie into New York's ecosystem, all those different pieces. So we do a lot of investment there. Then when I look at the other two legs, so we have our centers, so our centers of advanced technology, centers of excellence. That's our university. That's really kind of the research side of how do I go and just solve a tough technical problem? How do I access all the resources that a large, academic institution has, that equipment, all those different resources, smart people, ideas, knowledge. How do I actually make that available? And so where NYSTAR plays is we're funding those institutions very specifically at that boundary of collaboration. It's not pure academic research. It's how are they connecting with the industrial space, companies, large, small, how are they helping, those kinds of pieces. And then the third leg is really that manufacturing extension partnership. So we're the NIST designated New York MEP, and we fund MEP centers, one in each region of the state and one statewide. And that's really, okay, so now as I have that idea coming out and I actually need to go build it, I'm going to have challenges on how do I build it, ideally locally, but then also how do I do that? A lot of them are, I need to bake this pipe and it twists and it does all these things. How do I actually, manufacture that in a scalable way? And then also, how do I move up that scalable curve of, okay, I can make 1, I can make 10, I need to make 1,000, 10,000, 100. How do you actually make that transition? The MEPs are there to help with how do you get certifications? How do you tie into our ecosystem? All those different types of pieces. So those are kind of the 3 legs. And then, we go back to, okay, so I'm a startup in that incubation phase. It's the death by 1,000 cuts, right? It's, hey, I don't have a lawyer. People are telling me I need to have a freedom to practice or freedom to operate. I don't even know what that means. We fund the Syracuse Law Center that helps advise on those types of things. Okay, great. Now I want to go get funding. I want an SBIR grant or STTR. I want, there's these federal funds available. I need to get some capital. We fund Cornell to actually help strengthen those proposals and help them go through that. And we're actually about to launch a matching program. The state will match some of those grants as well, which is going to be helpful for that. So as we kind of walk through and just look at what are all the ways that those entrepreneurs, those small businesses, those innovators, what are the ways that trip them up? And it's a lot of those things that are problematic. How do we just, again, soften all those hurdles? I think the state has done, well before I stepped into NYSTAR, they've been doing it for decades and really kind of created that foundation on which all that goes through. So when you talk about kind of what's the next step and the thing that I'm excited about, it's such an exciting time to be in innovation. I mean, whether it's, first of all, the federal government, there's so many different opportunities out there with the CHIPS Act, the infrastructure bill, all those types of things are just infusing money. And New York is doing incredibly well. We have 2 national tech hubs now. We just had announced regional innovation engine from NSF out in Binghamton for batteries. The life sciences space is booming. We have an entire group under ESD that's looking at life science investment and those types of pieces. So just each of those areas is just starting to hit and pop and go through. And to me, when I look at NYSTAR, it's really how do, a lot of that is based on the work that my predecessors did 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago on laying that ecosystem of, hey, let's look at how do we fund, semiconductor research in Albany? How do we look at, building that whole foundation? And that's been built out. And now we're reaping the rewards of that. And part of the thing that excites me is now how do we look at, one, we got to deliver on that. We've all the baseline is there. Now we got to make sure we go and, New York is leading in a lot of those areas. How do we make sure we're successful? And then the second real interesting question is, what's the next piece that we got to, that we're laying the foundation of now that's going to be the 5, 10, 15 years from now? We've got these big payoffs in terms of the stuff we're going. So really kind of looking holistically at that ecosystem. What are the areas that we, where do we need to double down? Where do we need to grow something we don't have yet? How do we lever that whole, again, that 80 plus assets across the state? There are through lines of how do you, even life sciences, we look across Stony Brook, Cornell, Buffalo, we have the Downstate Medical Incubator, all those things playing together. How do we actually make sure that whole ecosystem is connected, that the companies coming through it understand how they navigate it, and really make sure that they have a path to successful commercialization of what they're doing?
Let's maybe you could talk a little bit more about kind of making those connections. As I listen to you talk, really about kind of the sprawling system, Ben, that you oversee, and then of course the even kind of larger state commitments in spaces. And I hope you'll forgive me, but I think it's probably fair to say in the history of time, right? Nobody's ever woken up and said, let me log on to New York State's website and see what they have to offer me, right?
Yeah.
For those watching who have not been connected to NYSTAR or to some of the assets, how do you make those assets more visible? How do you what's the ground game in connecting companies, innovators, entrepreneurs to the programs and initiatives that you oversee?
Yep. So a few different. First of all, I was one of those. Before I came into this position, I could not have told you anything about what NYSTAR was or what it does, and it's been just eye-opening for me. And that's one of the reasons I had to apply is as I read through, and it was I went and I found the website, and I was like, if this job is anything like what I'm picturing in my brain, I have to go after it because this is incredible. And by the way, I had no idea this existed in the world and those kinds of things. So certainly the information is there, but to your point, it's not something people are going to go and find. So I think there's a few different ways you can access it. One is, personally, myself and my team, make ourselves incredibly available. So, as we send this out, feel free to share my email. I have companies reach out to me. I have, people that with an idea reach out to me, and then we help connect them into that network. Um, so one is use us directly. The second is certainly, again, we have a lot of regional investments. So both ESD has regional offices that are great and know know that entire ecosystem in their region. So there's one in each state. So there's that. We also have hotspots in every region that know all the incubators and all those different pieces. The MEPs are regional. So a lot of it is, and again, that may be hard to just go and find. Again, if you're just out in, Buffalo and you say, hey, I don't even know where to start. One way to start is reach out to us, and we're happy to then connect you into where the right place is to start in that ecosystem. My experience so far is all of those partners across the NYSTAR network are incredibly open to talking to, those startups, those small businesses, the large businesses, whoever needs their help. Like, that's what they're there for. That's what we fund them for. They have that. I think the piece that's interesting is the next. So that's connection one, right? How do I just put you in touch with? How do I solve your immediate need? Go talk to this Center of Advanced Technology that's down the street from you that knows or across the state because you specifically need help in, AI, and here's the place to connect for that, or communications, or pick your, technology. We'll connect to the right place. Layer two, which I think is where I'm actually quite interested and excited to continue to grow this, is that cross connection of those resources. I think, we always talk a big game about this is one big connected network, but when you actually get kind of down to brass tacks, it doesn't necessarily always happen that way. And I think one of the things we're starting to see, and actually a lot of it is spurred by these federal opportunities. I mean, you look at some of these tech hubs and the consortiums they had to build to think about, hey, if I'm going to take a look at semiconductors or batteries or even what we're doing in the life sciences spaces, that's not hey, I'm going to just go run in my little lane and think about it. It's how do I think statewide about where's the right place? Who has the thought leadership in some of these areas? Where would you manufacture this? Who do we need to pull in from that ecosystem? It really is, a much larger kind of consortium might not be the right word, but that kind of level thought of, hey, we need to think bigger because the problems we're looking to solve are not, you can't just be your cog in the machine. You got to look at the machine and understand how it all fits together and layer that in. And I think more and more we're seeing both opportunity to do that, but also incredible willingness across that network to go and do that. So I think that's one from our kind of ESD and NYSTAR standpoint. Is the more we can cultivate that cross-regional collaboration across these assets, the better, the state is going to perform in terms of these things. Because, and I think, I'll say that what we're hearing is and evidenced by some of these awards, we're getting the visibility for it. I think, we're bringing in the NSFs and the EDAs, and they're just saying, hey, this ecosystem that's been built out is really, it's unique to New York. It's powerful, and they see what it can lead to in terms of that.
Well, Ben, this has been really just a small slice of where I'd love to have this conversation go, but I appreciate you spending some time with us. This is, again, Ben Verschueren, the Executive Director of the New York Department of Science, Technology, and Innovation, known as NYSTAR. We're happy always to connect our friends at ESD and NYSTAR to the Life Sciences New York membership. Ben, we look forward to hearing from more of you in the future. It's an exciting vision, so congratulations.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks much, Ben.